Samantha stared out the cafe window, lost in thought as she stirred her latte absent-mindedly. The buzz of chatter and clatter of dishes faded into background noise as her mind wandered. She felt restless, like she might burst out of her skin at any moment. Glancing down, she realized she had been stirring her coffee so vigorously it was now a light caramel color rather than its original dark brown. With a sigh, she set down the spoon and took a sip of the over-diluted drink. Looking around at the other patrons in the crowded cafe, Samantha felt a pang of loneliness and isolation. Couples laughed together over brunch, families chatted animatedly, students typed away on laptops or scribbled in notebooks. Everyone seemed to have a purpose or place to belong except for her. Samantha's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her fiancé Ethan, asking her to meet him downtown after work so they could tour a potential wedding venue. She had forgotten they had even made plans. A wave of anxiety washed over Samantha as she thought about the wedding, only 4 months away now. Though she cared deeply for Ethan, she wasn't sure she was ready to settle down and play the part of dutiful wife so soon. In a rush of recklessness, Samantha made a decision. She would not meet Ethan tonight. In fact, she would not see him or anyone else she knew for quite a while. She was going to get away from this monotonous life once and for all, if just for a little while. Samantha threw some cash on the counter for her uneaten food and hurried out of the cafe, invigorated by her spontaneity. She drove home and packed a suitcase with some clothes and essentials. Without allowing herself time to second-guess, she got in her car and started driving east out of the city. She figured she would drive as far as she felt like going, winding along back roads and stopping in small towns as the mood struck her. She had always longed for an adventure like this but had never been brave enough to actually go through with it. But today, something was different. She finally felt bold enough to step outside the cautious boundaries she had constructed around her life. As Samantha watched the skyscrapers disappear behind her in the rearview mirror, her nerves were replaced by a thrilling sense of freedom. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but she knew it was exactly what she needed. For the first time in a long time, she was following her heart instead of just going through the motions. Samantha rolled down the windows and turned up the radio, letting the wind whip through her hair as she drove on toward a future filled with endless possibility. Samantha awoke just as the first rays of dawn were creeping over the distant mountains. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure of where she was. Then she remembered, she was somewhere in central British Columbia, having stopped the night before at a cozy roadside motel. She stretched and got out of bed, eager to get back on the open road. After a quick shower and change of clothes, she grabbed a cereal bar from her bag to munch on for breakfast. Within 10 minutes Samantha was driving again, winding her way further into the heart of the province. As the morning mist burned away under the rising sun, Samantha was awestruck at the dramatic beauty unfurling around her. The highway cut through steep valleys dotted with evergreen trees, leading to snow-capped mountain peaks that jutted into the sky. She drove with the windows down, letting the crisp, pine-scented air blow through the car. Whenever she came across a lookout point or scenic overlook, she would pull over and get out, taking in the spectacular views. It made her feel alive in a way she hadn't for years back home. Around midday, Samantha started seeing signs for Radium Hot Springs. She recalled her family trips there when she was young, the times they would drive up from the family ranch in Alberta to swim in the mineral-rich waters and picnic under the colorful canopy of changing leaves. On a whim, Samantha decided to take the exit and head into town. She paid the entrance fee to the springs and found herself a quiet spot to soak along the shoreline of the turquoise pool. As she gazed up at the surrounding mountain peaks and breathed in the smell of sulfur and pine needles, nostalgic memories of childhood summers spent splashing in these very waters flooded over her. She sank into the warm, soothing waters and closed her eyes, overcome with bittersweet emotion. After her soak, feeling rejuvenated, Samantha wandered along the town's main street and poked around in the quirky shops, art galleries, and cafes. It was a rustic mountain town trapped in time, and she loved it. For a late lunch, she stopped at a cozy local diner where she feasted on wild game and listened eagerly to the old men at the counter trade tales and wisdom, in hushed voices. Their weathered faces held adventurous histories she would never know. Samantha left Radium Hot Springs feeling invigorated and nostalgic. She was already addicted to this unpredictable journey and all the places and people it was bringing into her life. As she got back on the open highway once more, she wondered what other forgotten memories or hidden gems she might uncover along the way. The possibilities felt as endless and inspiring as the stretching road before her. Samantha squinted against the afternoon sun, trying to make out the words on the peeling paint of the roadside garage. She had been driving for a couple hours since leaving Radium Hot Springs when her car started making a strange clanking noise. Luckily she had just reached a small town, though she didn't see much around besides this rundown auto shop and a few houses. With a sigh, she pulled in next to the pump outside the garage. An old hound dog resting in the shade lifted his head to watch her, then settled back down with a disinterested huff. "Hello?" Samantha called out, stepping into the dim, oil-scented interior of the garage. "Be right there," a gravelly voice called from the back room. Samantha wandered around, looking at the dusty trophies and fading poster calendars adorning the walls as she waited. After a few minutes, a tall, lean man with a bushy gray mustache came ambling out, wiping his hand on a rag. "What can I do for you, young lady?" he asked with a smile. Samantha explained about the odd clanking noise and how she hoped it was nothing serious since she was just passing through. "No problem, I'll take a listen," he said, heading out to her car. After poking around under the hood for a few minutes, he came back in. "Just needs a new belt, 20 minutes to replace it." "You're lucky you stopped in when you did though, it could have snapped out there on the highway. Could get stranded a long ways from help." As the mechanic worked on her car, he made idle chat with Samantha, asking where she was headed. She explained she was on a spontaneous road trip, seeking adventure. The old man chuckled. "Good for you," he said. "I took a trip like that back in my youth, looking for freedom and fortune. Ended up changing my whole darn life." He went on to tell Samantha about the ranching and rodeoing he did out west before an injury led him back home, to open this modest garage. "So you never know where the road will take you," he told her with a wink. "Just follow your heart." Samantha left the garage with a renewed spark of excitement for her journey. Back on the open road, she mulled over the mechanic's words, feeling emboldened to see where this adventure would lead. As Samantha crossed into Manitoba, she was surprised by how flat and vast the landscape was compared to the jagged, snow-capped mountains of British Columbia. Endless fields of wheat and sunflowers stretched to the horizon, broken up by scattered farming communities and the occasional lake glinting in the distance. Consulting her map, Samantha decided to stop for the night in Winnipeg, Manitoba's capital and largest city. She checked into a hotel near the historic Exchange District, eager to explore the area known for its early 20th century architecture. The next morning, Samantha wandered the neighborhood, marveling at the ornate terracotta and limestone buildings. She spent some time browsing the boutiques, bookstores, and galleries that filled the converted early 1900s warehouses. For lunch, she stopped at a cozy cafe and ordered galapki, or stuffed cabbage rolls, a local Mennonite dish. The hearty meal of spiced beef wrapped in tender cabbage leaves and baked in a fresh tomato sauce warmed her up on that crisp fall day. After lunch, Samantha visited the Manitoba Museum to immerse herself in the province's history and culture. She was fascinated by the exhibits portraying Manitoba's fur trade era, the pioneering of the prairies, and the lives of the many diverse Aboriginal tribes that have called this region home for millennia. One exhibit that particularly captured Samantha's imagination was about the Icelandic heritage of the Interlake region north of Winnipeg. She had not realized that a piece of the rugged Nordic island was recreated here on the prairies in the late 19th century, by a wave of Icelandic immigrants. The museum had artifacts from the original Icelandic settlers juxtaposed against the thriving Icelandic communities that persist today. Samantha added the new Iceland Heritage Museum in Gimli to her growing list of stops for her trip. She was gaining a newfound appreciation for the multitude of cultures woven into the tapestry of this vast land she was traversing. Reflecting on her day, Samantha realized she felt more relaxed and open-minded already, just a few days into this journey. Back home, her mind was often preoccupied with constant lists and worries, but here on the open road she found she could simply be present, embracing each new experience as it came. It was incredibly freeing. Samantha sipped her beer slowly, savoring the crisp, cold taste as she gazed around the crowded bar. She was in Thunder Bay for the night, a port city along the northern shore of Lake Superior. The bar was filled with boisterous, off-duty miners still dressed in their work clothes. Earlier that day, she had toured the amethyst mines just outside the city, fascinated by the brilliant purple quartz extracted from the depths of the earth. She had watched burly miners heading home after their shifts and figured this would be the perfect place to hear their stories. She ended up chatting with a group of them who, once they heard she was traveling solo, insisted on buying her drinks and sharing tales to help her journey. "There's nothing like the North Shore, I'll tell ya," said Tom, a bearded giant of a man. "The big lake, the rugged land, the northern lights, makes you feel alive." His buddy Mitch chimed in, "You gotta get out to the wild national parks along Superior Pukasqua, Lake Superior. More beautiful than you can imagine. But also more dangerous, the way that lake can turn on you in a storm. She demands respect." Samantha soaked up their words like a sponge, feeling a growing desire to go even farther east instead of looping back west. These men lived for adventure, discovery, pushing the extremes of wilderness and endurance. She yearned for the self-knowledge that seemed to emanate from them. The night wore on, the lively banter and drinking games continuing late into the evening. Samantha was sad to say goodbye to her new friends, but they made her promise to keep pushing forward, to say yes to new challenges and experiences. "Don't stop till you reach the Atlantic," Tom bellowed as she hugged him. "Goodbye." His words echoed in Samantha's mind as she drifted off to sleep that night, the taste of beer still on her lips. When she awoke the next morning, she knew there was no turning back now. The Atlantic was her new destination, drawing her ever forward like a siren's irresistible call. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready for the adventure. Samantha took a deep breath of crisp ocean air as she stepped out of her car. After days of driving, she had finally reached the rocky coastline of Nova Scotia. Following the miners' advice, she had continued eastward, fueled by her growing sense of adventure and independence. The crashing of waves against weathered cliffs and crying of seagulls overhead immediately made Samantha feel at peace. This is exactly the type of escape she had been longing for. Eager to explore, she set out walking along the shoreline. The salty breeze tousled her hair as she hopped across tide pools and traced her fingers along the smooth edges of sea-worn rocks. In the distance, she spotted a lighthouse standing sentinel on a grassy outcropping. Surmising there must be a village nearby, Samantha followed a winding cliffside path in that direction. Soon she arrived at a small, picturesque fishing village, with tidy cottages in vibrant sherbet colors perched along the shore. An old stone church anchored the village, its stoic bell tower standing watch over the harbor. Samantha wandered the main street, peeking into art studios and craft shops featuring the works of local artisans. In one gallery, her eye was drawn to a series of stunning photographs of wild horses running free along the beaches and meadows. They seemed to capture the spirit of freedom that had carried her on this journey. "Those are the Sable Island horses," said the owner, noticing her interest. "There's a mysterious island east of here where they roam untamed." Samantha was instantly captivated by the idea of this magical isle with its call of the wild. She left the shop determined to learn more about Sable Island and how she might be able to visit. Further down the street, she came across a yard sale being held outside of a rambling old inn and pub. One table was filled with horse tack, grooming supplies, and books on horsemanship. Struck by inspiration, Samantha asked the woman running the sale about farms or stables in the area that might be hiring. A spark of excitement flashed through her at the thought of starting a new adventure here by the sea. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," a young voice pierced Samantha's dreams. She blinked awake to find a freckle-faced girl grinning down at her. "Huh?" Samantha mumbled, sitting up on the lumpy couch she had collapsed on last night. "Come on, chores won't do themselves," the girl said, tossing Samantha a pair of muddy boots. Memories of the previous day washed over her. After inquiring about possible ranching jobs at the yard sale, Samantha had been directed to a property just outside of town. There she met Luke, a handsome but weary-looking single dad struggling to maintain the family horse ranch after his wife's recent passing. On a whim, partly because she loved the spirited horses and partly because she was captivated by Luke's chocolate brown eyes, Samantha had offered to pitch in temporarily in exchange for room and board. Luke reluctantly agreed, won over by her sincerity and pluck. Now here she was, being awoken at dawn by Luke's daughter Emily for her first full day on their farm. The girl's brother Thomas soon appeared too, and the kids eagerly showed Samantha the ropes of caring for horses and maintaining ranch facilities. Though initially messy and tiring work, Samantha felt a deep satisfaction in learning and applying these new skills. The horses especially captured her heart, each with their own personality that slowly emerged as she brushed their coats and offered treats. Luke kept his distance at first, but warmed up over shared meals and chores. Samantha caught glimpses of the playful, passionate spirit still alight under his hardened, grief-worn exterior. She felt compelled to nurture that spark, to show this makeshift family that hope could endure. That first evening, sore but fulfilled, Samantha retired to the couch again. But this time as she drifted off, she felt truly at home for the first time in longer than she could remember. The song of crickets and nickering of horses outside her window were sweeter than any lullaby. She knew then that leaving her old life behind had been the right choice. She had found a new purpose here, surrounded by nature's simple wonders and honest work. Samantha smiled as she closed her eyes, eager for whatever this journey would bring next. Over the next few weeks, Samantha fell into a comfortable routine on the ranch. She continued learning the intricacies of caring for horses, like grooming techniques and treating minor injuries or illnesses. Emily and Thomas took turns teaching her how to properly saddle up each horse and the commands used while riding. Soon Samantha was confidently saddling up the horses herself each morning to bring them in from pasture. She learned each one's individual personality, which were eager to please, which liked to test her patience, and which would sneakily try to nip at her pockets seeking treats. Riding became one of Samantha's greatest joys. Flying across golden meadows aboard a powerful steed made her feel truly free and alive. The children joined her on rides whenever their homeschool lessons were done for the day. Their youthful laughter and competition to race lifted Samantha's spirit. In the afternoons, she helped Luke make repairs around the property, mending fences, painting the barn doors, tending the vegetable garden. At first they worked side by side mostly in silence. But over time, Luke began sharing memories about the land and his late wife. Samantha opened up too about the journey that had led her there. After the work was done, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, sipping sweet tea. A warm companionship grew between them, with laughter coming more easily and gazes lasting longer. Both were wary to act on the mutual attraction they felt, not wanting to jeopardize this haven for Luke's children. But the heart cannot be so easily controlled. At night, after the kids were tucked into bed, Samantha and Luke would stay up late talking by firelight about hopes, dreams, and second chances. Samantha wondered if this could be the new chapter her soul had been seeking. But a niggling doubt also lingered that this was too good to last. Samantha strolled along the bustling main street of the village, enjoying a rare day off from the ranch. Luke had gone into town too to pick up feed and supplies, and said he would meet her for lunch at the cafe. Ducking into little shops along the way, Samantha smiled thinking about how different this quaint seaside place was from the big city she used to call home. She felt she had adjusted to a simpler life here, finding joy in hard work, nature, and community. Glancing in a store window, Samantha suddenly froze. There, peering in at a display of nautical antiques, was a familiar face, her ex-fiancé Ethan. A flood of panic swept over her. She should have known he would come searching for her eventually. Ducking behind a parked car before he noticed her, Samantha's mind raced about what to do next. She peered around the bumper cautiously. Ethan was still focused on the shop's contents, though he looked tired and distressed. Part of Samantha ached to run and embrace him, to soothe the pain she knew her disappearance must have caused. But the stronger voice within screamed at her to turn and run before he ruined this newfound bliss. Samantha slipped down a side alley, making her way along back routes toward the heart of town. She felt Ethan's sudden presence like a dark rain cloud passing over the sun. It shook her to be reminded of that former life and the choices she had left behind. Ducking into the bustling cafe, Samantha slid into a corner booth half hidden by a divider. Her appetite was gone, but she ordered coffee to give her shaking hands something to grasp. She needed time to think before facing Luke. As much as her heart longed to cling to this fresh start, Samantha knew Ethan's arrival signaled the collision of past and present. Difficult decisions lay ahead, but she promised herself to follow her truest instincts rather than just what was safe and familiar. This journey had given her the courage to chart her own course at last. Samantha winced as Luke gently wrapped the bandage around her sprained ankle. She had taken one of the newer horses out for some training that morning, but it had shied away from a plastic bag blowing across the path, causing her to be thrown from the saddle. "It's just a mild sprain," Luke assured her. "You'll be back in the saddle in no time." His strong, calloused hands felt comforting, supporting her injured ankle. Samantha grimaced. "I hope so. I never should have taken Maverick out alone so soon." Luke placed his hand over hers. "You couldn't have known how he would react. Don't be so hard on yourself." His kind eyes and warm palm sent Samantha's heart aflutter. She tried to ignore the zing of electricity running up her arm at his touch. There were more pressing matters to discuss. "Luke, there's something I need to tell you." Samantha took a shaky breath. "My ex-fiancé tracked me down. He's here in town looking for me." Luke's brow furrowed as she explained the situation. "What are you going to do?" he asked quietly. Samantha sighed. "Part of me wants to run back to what's familiar. But everything in my heart tells me I belong here now, with you and the kids." She hesitated before continuing in a rush. "Maybe it's too soon to say, but you three make me feel like I have a family for the first time in my life." Luke gently cupped her cheek in his hand. "We feel the same way. I don't want you to go." They gazed at each other, the air thick with unspoken emotion. The moment was broken by Emily and Thomas bursting in from school. But a silent promise had been made between Samantha and Luke. They would face the future, whatever it held, arm in arm. Samantha paced the worn wooden floorboards of the front porch, wringing her hands nervously. Any minute now, her parents would be pulling up the gravel drive, having tracked her down thanks to Ethan. She dreaded having to face their concern and disappointment at her running away, but knew it was inevitable once they learned she was here. Samantha hoped she could make them understand why she had to leave, and how much she had grown on this journey of self-discovery. The rumble of tires on gravel alerted her to their arrival. Samantha steeled herself as her parents climbed out of the car and came hurrying up to embrace her. As expected, they were full of anxious questions about where she had been and why she left. "I'm sorry I worried you both," Samantha said. "But this trip has been the adventure of a lifetime. I've discovered so much about myself and what really makes me happy." She told them all about the people she'd met and experiences she'd had that opened her mind and heart, in ways her sheltered life back home never could. "This ranch feels more like home than anywhere else," she explained. "I want you to understand, even if you don't agree." Samantha's mom shook her head. "Home is back with the people who love you. You have responsibilities, your job, Ethan, the wedding." As they continued trying to convince her to return with them, Luke stepped forward and introduced himself. Samantha looked at him gratefully. She was prepared to defend the life they were building together. After much difficult discussion, her parents reluctantly agreed to give her time to fully consider her choices. As they drove off, Samantha slumped down on the porch steps, emotionally drained. Luke sat beside her reassuringly. There was still Ethan to face, and her own conflicted heart to unravel. Samantha froze as the screen door slammed shut. She had just finished clearing the dinner dishes when Ethan came storming across the yard toward her. "There you are," he shouted, face contorted in anger and relief. "Do you have any idea what you put me through running off like that? The wedding is in 2 weeks." Samantha stood her ground. "Ethan, I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. But too much has happened, I'm not the same person I was." She tried to explain everything she had discovered on her travels, how she felt called to a different life now. But Ethan wasn't listening. "Enough excuses," he spat. "It's time to stop this childish rebellion and come home where you belong." He grabbed her wrist in a vice-like grip. Just then Luke came barreling out of the barn. "I believe she asked you to let her go," he said in a steely voice. "This is none of your concern," Ethan sneered. Stay out of it. Samantha wrenched free of Ethan's grasp. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said shakily. My place is here now. Ethan's face turned an ugly shade of purple. If you think I'm leaving without you, you're out of your mind. You're my fiancé. He moved towards Samantha menacingly. In a flash, Luke stepped between them, shoving Ethan back. I won't let you force her into anything, he growled. The two men stood chest to chest, rage simmering. Samantha hurriedly stepped in. Ethan, please, you need to accept that our relationship is over. Her voice trembled but didn't waver. With a venomous glare, Ethan spat at their feet. You'll regret this, he snarled before turning abruptly and storming away. They watched as his car swerved down the gravel lane, churning up clouds of dust. Samantha fell into Luke's arms, finally allowing herself to cry in mingled relief and grief at the life she was finally free to leave behind. Samantha blinked back tears as she packed her duffel bag. After Ethan's hostile departure last night, Luke had turned cold and withdrawn. This morning he had tersely asked her to start making arrangements to leave the ranch. I'm sorry, but it's clear your past is still causing turmoil, he had said, refusing to meet her eyes. It would be better if you moved on. Samantha had tried explaining that she was ready for a fresh start with him, but Luke remained stoic. She knew his hardened heart still bore scars from losing his wife. He had opened himself up to Samantha, only to be hurt again. She ached for his pain, even as her own heart was breaking. Zipping up her bag, Samantha took one last look around the cozy barn room that had become her sanctuary this past month. She would miss the children terribly, and the horses whose quirks and spirits she had come to know and love. Most of all, her soul grieved at leaving Luke, the man who had sparked such joy and purpose within her. But she respected his wishes, hoping he would find some peace. Samantha slung her bag over her shoulder and headed out to where her car was parked. Emily and Thomas raced over to hug her tight, making her promise to call soon. She ruffled their hair fondly before turning to open the car door. Wait, Luke's voice cracked behind her. She spun to see him striding toward her, regret etched on his face. Please don't go, he implored, taking her hands in his with a tenderness that gave her the first flicker of hope. Samantha's heart caught in her throat as Luke grasped her hands, pleading with her to stay. She searched his eyes, normally so stoic but now swirling with emotion. Why the change of heart, she asked tentatively. Luke sighed. After you left, Emily and Thomas gave me an earful. They helped me realize I was pushing away someone they had come to see as family, someone I care deeply for too. He looked utterly vulnerable in that moment. I was letting the past haunt me, like I didn't deserve to find love again. I'm sorry I hurt you, will you give me another chance? Joy surged through Samantha's veins even as tears sprang to her eyes. Of course. She threw her arms around Luke's neck. All I want is a life here with you and the children. They held each other tightly under the setting sun, the last wisps of pain and doubt evaporating. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home. Around them, the horses whinnied and stomped their hooves, picking up on the excitement. Emily and Thomas whooped and cheered. Does this mean Samantha is staying forever? Emily asked hopefully. Luke smiled, a spark returning to his eyes that had been missing since his wife passed. I hope so, if she'll have me. This journey brought me right where I belong, Samantha said, ruffling the girl's hair. She glanced back at the little farmhouse that had become her heart's home. The future brimmed with promise and joy once more. Samantha took a deep breath as she soaked in the sun-dappled meadow around her. She was riding Luke's horse, Copper, enjoying one last jaunt across the countryside she had come to love before returning to Vancouver. It had been a difficult decision, but after much soul-searching she knew she couldn't stay at the ranch permanently. As much as her heart now belonged to Luke, she needed to fully close the chapter of her old life first. Luke had confessed his love and asked her to stay, promising they would face any lingering obstacles together. But Samantha gently turned him down, explaining she owed it to herself and Ethan to find closure before pursuing a new relationship. As hard as it was to leave Luke and the kids, Samantha knew once she settled things back home, without loose ends hanging over her, she could return to them wholeheartedly. She hoped Luke would wait for her. Bringing Copper to a stop atop a hill overlooking the sea, Samantha breathed in the brisk ocean air. This landscape had nurtured her battered soul back to life, and she would carry it with her in her heart always. Its wild, pure beauty would be her touchstone in the trials ahead. Turning Copper back toward home, Samantha set her shoulders resolutely. She was no longer the timid girl who had fled here from an aimless life. Her journey had forged a strong, confident woman ready to take destiny into her own hands. As the ranch came into view, she whispered a silent promise, "I will return to you one day." Wheeling Copper into a gallop, they raced the wind currents flowing inland from the sea. Samantha took a deep breath as the plane touched down in Vancouver. It had been a month since she returned home to set things right. After ending her engagement to Ethan, who thankfully let her go with little fuss, she had sold most of her belongings, quit her job, and sublet her apartment. She was closing one chapter to start a new one. Stepping outside the airport, Samantha was struck by how foreign the city now seemed. The traffic noises grated on her nerves, and the crowds made her claustrophobic after so long spent in wide-open spaces. The corporate towers loomed like unnatural metal giants. At her small sublet apartment, Samantha lay awake all night feeling restless and unsettled. She missed the comforting sounds of horses stamping in their stalls and owls hooting in the darkness. But most of all, her heart ached for Luke and the children. In the morning, Samantha hurried to a stationery shop and purchased parchment paper and a fountain pen. Sitting at a cafe table, she slowly poured her swirling thoughts into a heartfelt letter to Luke back at the ranch. She told him about closing the loop on her old life, but how nothing had filled the hole left by her departure from the only place that had truly felt like home. She longed to build a new home by his side, if he would still have her. Samantha walked on air to the post office, elated to finally send her hopes across the country to the man who held her future in his hands. She only prayed he would welcome her back with open arms when she returned. Luke set down his hammer, wiping sweat from his brow as he glanced up at the setting sun. He had been working all afternoon on repairing some fencing along the back pasture, trying to keep his mind occupied. But it constantly wandered back to Samantha. It had been over a week since her letter had arrived, bearing news of her return to Vancouver and desire to come back to him someday. Luke's heart had leapt at her words, but as the days passed with no contact, doubts began seeping in. What if she changed her mind and realized her feelings for him weren't real? Or decided country life wasn't what she wanted after all? Luke shook his head, trying to clear the negative thoughts. He just needed to have faith. Walking back toward the house, he noticed a rental car coming up the lane, trailing a cloud of dust. Shielding his eyes, Luke peered at the driver, and his heart nearly stopped. It was her. Samantha stepped out holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "I'm home," she said simply, her face radiant with joy and love. Suddenly, Luke was bounding across the field to sweep her up in his embrace. "Promise you'll never leave again," he implored, burying his face in her hair. Samantha cupped his bearded cheek tenderly. "I promise. My wandering soul has found its home with you." Their reunion was interrupted by Emily and Thomas sprinting from the porch, yelling jubilantly and hugging Samantha's legs. Laughing happily, she walked hand in hand with the children inside, never taking her eyes off Luke. This small farm was now her whole world. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Luke and Samantha finally had a moment alone together sitting out on the porch swing. The stars were bright and endless above them, the Milky Way swirling across the dark canvas. Their future stretched before them just as vast and full of possibility. Samantha took a deep breath as she smoothed her hair in the hallway mirror. In just moments she would be walking down the aisle, committing to a new life with Luke. But first, she had to make peace with the past. A door opened behind her, and Ethan stepped out. Anger flashed in his eyes at first, but then his expression softened to sadness. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for how things ended between us." Samantha gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. I'm sorry too, I never meant to hurt you. I wish you every happiness." Ethan nodded, then gestured down the hall. "You should go. Your groom is waiting." Samantha squeezed his hand one last time, then turned and strode toward the chapel entrance, head held high. The organ swelled, filling the vaulted room with music. It was time. All eyes were on Samantha as she glided down the aisle. But she saw only Luke, his handsome face aglow with joy and tears shimmering in his warm brown eyes. Reaching the altar at last, Samantha took Luke's hand, feeling her soul settle. Friends, family, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of this man and woman. The officiant began. As they exchanged heartfelt vows, the gravity of this moment washed over Samantha. She had finally found her true partner for life's journey. United in love, they could weather any storms ahead. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cheers erupted as Luke pulled Samantha into a kiss, dipping her back playfully. Arm in arm, their future unfurled brightly before them. At the reception, Ethan approached the newlyweds. Be good to her, he told Luke sincerely. Samantha kissed Ethan's cheek in thanks. She was overwhelmed by the blessings of this second chance at life and love. Samantha awoke to the cries of seagulls and a salty ocean breeze ruffling the curtains. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the memories came flooding back, the small ceremony on the ranch, packed bags, and tearful goodbyes to Luke's children, and then boarding a flight to Nova Scotia. She rolled over to see her new husband sleeping peacefully beside her. They had arrived late last night to the cozy cottage Luke had rented for their honeymoon on the eastern shore. It was a blissful, restful haven all their own. Samantha slipped out of bed to stand at the window overlooking the rocky coastline. The morning sun glittered on the deep blue waves rolling rhythmically to the shore. She breathed in the refreshing maritime air, thanking the universe for this gift. Strong arms suddenly enveloped her from behind. Good morning, Mrs. Campbell, Luke murmured, kissing the top of her head. Shall we go for a walk along the beach after breakfast? Strolling hand in hand along the water's edge later, with sand tickling their toes, Samantha's heart was overflowing with wonder and joy. The soaring cries of the gulls matched the expansive feelings within her chest. She paused to gaze up at Luke, his handsome face bathed in the glow of the rising sun. Promise we'll come back here again someday, she whispered. He pulled her close and kissed her deeply, the taste of their future salty sweet upon their lips. This honeymoon escape by the sea was only the start of the blessed adventure they now embarked upon together, through whatever storms or paradise awaited over the horizon. 5 years later Samantha smiled as a pair of small arms wrapped around her legs. Mommy, come play, her daughter Hannah exclaimed, blue eyes shining brightly. In a minute sweetie, I just have to finish folding this laundry, Samantha replied, setting another tiny shirt into the wicker basket. Hannah scampered back outside to join her older brothers Thomas and William in the yard. Samantha's heart swelled at the sounds of their playful shouts and laughter. Just then, Luke strode into the cozy farmhouse kitchen, dusty from a morning of work in the fields. He came up behind Samantha, circling his arms around her waist and nuzzling her neck. How's my beautiful wife today? Samantha leaned back into him contentedly. Perfect now that you're home. She still thrilled at his touch, even after 5 wonderful years of marriage. Later, after the children were asleep, Samantha and Luke sat out on the porch gazing up at the stars twinkling over their land. Their hands intertwined, Samantha was overcome with gratitude for the family and life they now shared. She thought back to that fateful day when she spontaneously fled her unfulfilling life, embarking on a journey that led her to Luke. Though she had been running away, she had actually been brought home. Samantha squeezed Luke's hand and he brought it to his lips for a kiss, their rings glinting in the moonlight. No matter what adventures awaited over the horizon, they would cherish this peace together tonight.